But even here, the special concern of natural law theorists is with the reasons people have for recognizing and honoring claims to authority, for treating certain institutions or people or the scripture as authoritative. We don't think it's legitimate simply to appeal to authority to justify authority. One might then ask whether human beings are in fact rational in anything more than an instrumental sense. So far, I've been assuming that people really are capable of acting on the basis of more than merely instrumental reasons, and in that sense, being able to act freely, to genuinely be agents, and not just sophisticated machines or brute animals. Can we discern intelligible reasons for our choices and actions? Well, of course, everybody recognizes that some ends or purposes pursued through human action are intelligible, at least insofar as they provide means to other ends. For example, people work to earn money, and their doing so is perfectly rational. Money is a valuable means to a great many important ends, and no one doubts its instrumental value. The question is whether some ends or purposes are intelligible as providing more than merely instrumental reasons. Are there intrinsic as well as instrumental good? So now money is a classic example of a purely instrumental good. I mean, if there weren't something you could do with it, extrinsic to it itself, it would be worthless. It's just little green paper. Right? If you have a person, I guess it's the definition of a miser, a person who values money as if it were an intrinsic good and not instrumentally valuable. Right? Money's valuable because you can buy things with it. It provides security or prestige or some other thing extrinsic to the money itself. But are there other goods that are not strictly reducible to their instrumental benefit? Skeptics deny that there are intelligible ends or purposes that make possible rationally motivated action. Natural law theorists, by contrast, hold that friendship, knowledge, critical aesthetic appreciation, friendship with God, virtue itself, other ends or purposes of that nature are intrinsically valuable and provide, as such, more than merely instrumental reasons. Things that we see the point of doing, even if the point is not something extrinsic to which the activity is a mere means. Now, these basic human goods are constitutive aspects of the well-being and fulfillment of human persons in the communities they form, and it's precisely as such that they are at the foundations of our moral judgments, including our judgments pertaining to justice and human rights. I argued earlier that what moral principles are entailments of the human good, the variegated human good integrally conceived. Of course, there are plenty of people today who embrace philosophical or ideological doctrines that deny the human capacities I maintain are at the core of human dignity. They adopt a purely instrumental and essentially non-cognitivist view of practical reason, most famously articulated by the great 18th century skeptic David Hume, the British philosopher who put it very colorfully. Hume argued against the idea that there are any intrinsic human goods, or that we were capable of knowing any such things, by saying that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and may pretend to no office other than to serve and obey them. This is the classic formulation or account of the purely instrumental view of practical reason. Reason can't tell you what to want. That's going to be given by feeling, emotion, desire, the passions, some sub-rational motivating factor. All reason can do is serve as the ingenious slave of passion. It can tell you how to get what you want. It can't adjudicate among wants. It can only enable you to understand the way to get what you want. It can't tell you whether it's better to want what Mother Teresa wants or what Hitler wants. Mother Teresa wants to bring comfort to dying people on the streets of Calcutta. Hitler wants to push people into gas ovens. Reason can't tell you which is pursuing the most choice-worthy ends. It's only the slave of the passions. The passions will give you the ends. Passion gave Mother Teresa a desire to comfort people. Hitler a desire to kill people. What reason can do is tell Mother Teresa how more efficiently to bring comfort to more people, and tell Hitler how more efficiently to commit more murders. And so people who adopt the Humean view who think the thing through really carefully and critically, people like the philosopher Daniel Dennett, argue that the human experience of deliberation, judgment, and choice is ultimately illusory. The ends people pursue, they insist, are ultimately given by non-rational motivating factors such as feeling, emotion, desire, Hume's the passions. Hobbes had his own, Hume's predecessor, the English political philosopher Thomas Hobbes, had his own colorful way of putting the same point. Hobbes said that the thoughts, the mind, the intellect is what he had in mind, the thoughts are to the desires as scouts and spies to range abroad and find the way to the thing desired. The intellect can't tell you what to desire, but it's the scout, the spy, like Hume's slave, that can range abroad and find the way to the thing desired. So on the Humean, Hobbesian account, truly rationally motivated action is just impossible for people like us. What's going to motivate our actions are our passions, whatever they happen to be. And they will necessarily, of course, be subjective, not objective, as if they were reasons. There are, according to these people, no more than merely instrumental reasons, no basic human goods. Now, if proponents of this non-cognitivist and subjectivist view of human action are right, then it seems to me that the entire business of ethics is a charade and human dignity is a myth, though there are some contemporary Humeans who want to argue otherwise. But I don't think they are right. Indeed, I don't think they can give any account of the norms of rationality to which they must themselves appeal, and do appeal, in making the case they want to make against reason and freedom that is consistent with the denial that people are capable of more than merely instrumental rationality and true freedom of choice. For anyone who's interested in this debate, I realize that's kind of an abstract way of putting it. The Humean position, I've debated it with a very capable Australian Humean philosopher named Geoffrey Goldsworthy. And Goldsworthy defends Hume's position against my criticism, and then I say why I think the defense fails. Goldsworthy's articles found in the 1996 volume of the American Journal of Jurisprudence, and mine is published as chapter 1, I believe, of my book, In Defense of Natural Law. Now, I want to say I don't deny that emotion figures in human action. This is not a debate between people who think that it's all reason or it's all emotion. Of course, we're not just rational creatures. We're complicated, remember? We have emotions, and emotion does figure in our actions, obviously. And sometimes it or other sub-rational motivating factors, hunger, thirst, and so forth, does the main work of motivation. You're thirsty, you get a drink. But I maintain that people can have and often do have basic reasons for their actions, reasons provided by ends they understand as humanly fulfilling: friendship, knowledge, skill, aesthetics, faith, and desire precisely as such. In other words, sometimes it's our intelligent grasp of the intelligible point of the activity that generates the desire. And desire is not what's driving the train, relegating reason to the status of a mere instrument or an ingenious servant. Now, if I and other natural law theorists are correct in affirming that human reason can identify human rights as genuine grounds of obligation to others, how can we explain or understand widespread failures to recognize and respect human rights and other moral principles? Well, as human beings, we are rational animals, but we are imperfectly rational. We are prone to making intellectual and moral mistakes, and we're capable of grossly misbehaving, behaving unreasonably, out of line with a will toward the human good integrally conceived, especially when we're deflected by powerful emotions, such as self-interest or love of my clan or my own folks or whatever, that run contrary to the demands of reasonableness. Christians have a name for this: sin. And another name, fallenness. We suffer weakness of will and darkness of intellect. Even when following our consciences, as we are morally bound to do, we can go wrong. A judgment in line with conscience may nevertheless be erroneous because our conscience may be malformed or misinformed. Of course, sometimes people fail to recognize and respect human rights or other moral principles because they have self-interested motives for doing so. In most cases of exploitation, I'd venture to say, the fundamental failing is moral, not intellectual. The exploiter knows at some level what he's doing is wrong, but he gives in to the temptation out of self-interest to do it anyway. In some cases, though, intellectual and moral failures are closely connected. Selfishness, prejudice, partisanship, vanity, avarice, lust, ill will, any of the classic vices, moral delinquencies, can, in ways that we all know too well, are sometimes very subtle, impede or deflect sound ethical judgments, including judgments pertaining to justice or human rights. Whole cultures or subcultures can be infected with moral failings that blind large numbers of people in the culture to truths about justice and human rights, and ideologies hostile to these truths will almost always be both causes and effects of these failings. Consider, for example, the case of slavery in the antebellum American South. The ideology of white supremacy was both a cause of many people's blindness to the wickedness of slavery and an effect of the exploitation and degradation of its victims. It's the kind of thing that enabled otherwise honest, decent people to believe something as horrific as that it's perfectly okay to own and use and sell another person. Or consider the way the ideology of personal autonomy, the kind of me generation view of liberty, blinds large numbers of people to their obligations to others, including the unborn, thus making it possible for good people, people of goodwill, honest people, people that are not thugs or monsters, to believe that it's acceptable to kill the unborn. This is how it happens. Let me turn now, as I promised I would, more fully to the question of God and religious faith in natural law theory. Most, but not all, contemporary natural law theorists are theists, believers in a personal God, mostly Christians, but also some Jews and Muslims, especially in the Shia tradition, where the term natural law is typically not used, but something like the idea certainly figures. They believe that the moral order, like every other order in human experience, is what it is because God creates and sustains it as such. In accounting for the intelligibility of the created order in all of its dimensions, not just the moral dimension, they infer the existence of a free and creative intelligence, a personal God. They argue that God's creative freedom, his free choice, provides the only ultimately satisfactory account of the existence of the intelligibilities humans grasp in every domain of inquiry. Again, not just in the moral, but in the natural world, the world that we investigate in chemistry or physics or biology, in the logical order, which we all know we have to observe and bring into our reflection if we're to think well about anything, morality, the natural sciences, what have you. Or the technical order, which is the order in which we bring efficient means to bear to realize given ends, getting a bridge built or a building or what have you. Natural law theorists certainly do not deny that God can reveal moral truths, and most of us believe that God has chosen to reveal many such truths, and in revealing them, not only duplicates what can, at least in principle, be known by unaided reason, but illuminates what we know on the basis purely of natural law, and enriches our understanding of the larger and indeed cosmic significance of our choices and actions, be they good or bad. However, natural law theorists also affirm that many moral truths, including some that are revealed, can be grasped by ethical reflection apart from natural law. Typically, certainly among Christians, they assert that there is, to quote Paul, the law written on the hearts even of the Gentiles who do not know the law of Moses, a law the knowledge of which is sufficient for moral accountability. I learned today that there are competing interpretations from one of the New Testament scholars, there are competing interpretations of that language, but on one, at least one interpretation, one that's strongly highlighted in the natural law tradition, what Paul has in mind there is what we understand as the natural law. So the basic norms against murder and theft, for example, though revealed in the Decalogue, are knowable even apart from God's special revelation. The natural law can be known by us, at least in its basics, and we can conform our conduct to its terms, by virtue of our natural human capacities for deliberation, judgment, and choice. Now, the absence of a divine source of the natural law would be a puzzling thing, just as the absence of a divine source of any and every other intelligible order in human experience, the natural, the logical, the technical, would be a puzzling thing. An atheist's puzzlement, in the end, might well cause him to reconsider the idea that there is no divine source of the order we perceive and understand in the universe. You know, many a philosophical convert, and some who are not formal official philosophers, have come to faith precisely, or at least belief in theism, precisely for that reason. The most celebrated recent example, of course, is Antony Flew. It's far less likely, I think, to cause someone to conclude that our perception is illusory or that our understanding is a sham, though that is, of course, certainly logically possible, and there have been some cases, I suppose, where that's happened. The question then arises, can natural law, assuming that there are truly principles of natural law, provide common moral ground, at least some common moral or political ground, for people who do not agree on the existence of or nature of God and the role of God in human affairs? In my view, anybody who acknowledges the human capacities for reason and freedom has good grounds for affirming human dignity and basic human rights. These grounds remain in place whether or not one adverts to the question, is there a divine source of the moral order whose tenets we discern in inquiry regarding natural law and natural rights? Now, as you know, my own answer to that question is yes. I'm a believer, a theist, a Christian. So I think we should be open to the possibility that God has revealed himself in ways that reinforce, supplement, and even profoundly illuminate what can be known by unaided reason. But it seems to me that we need not agree on the answer so long as we agree about the truths that give rise to the question, namely, that human beings possessing the godlike, literally awesome powers of reason and freedom are bearers of a profound dignity that is protected by certain basic human rights. As Mary Ann Glendon tells the story of the framing of the UN Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, it was precisely this common ground that thinkers from a variety of traditions, including some such as Buddhism that were not theistic, were able to work out the basic rights, the basic terms of that set forth in that declaration. And I think it's not a mystery that such a thing could be possible. It's possible precisely because people can understand that human beings have a certain dignity, although I don't think they can understand the fullness of its meaning, even apart from faith, and will have a foundation for basic rights. My colleague Jeffrey Stout at Princeton, who is not a believer, who is a self-professed atheist, nevertheless makes the point, and I think he's right about this, that if one believes that man is made in the image and likeness of God, then even someone who doesn't believe in God should be able to see the image. There should be things about the creature allegedly made in the image and likeness of God that are evidence of the dignity of the person, and that he, as an atheist, can understand these powers that people ascribe to, account for, by reference to the proposition that man is made in the image and likeness of God. And even though he doesn't share that account, he doesn't believe in God, he understands that people have these godlike qualities, these qualities that would cause you to think people are made in the image and likeness of God. And this provides a foundation for him to believe in human rights as much as for theists, including Christians, to believe in human rights. Now, as far as it goes, that seems to me to be right, although then I would ask him the question, well, how could it be that human beings have such capacities and possess the dignity attaching to them? It seems to me that the strong case there is in favor of theism, and therefore openness to God's revelation, including God's self-revelation in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He sees the thing differently. So, if there are norms, moral norms, including norms of justice and human rights, that can be known by rational inquiry, understanding, and judgment, even apart from special revelation, then these norms of natural law can provide the basis of a common understanding of human rights, an understanding that can be shared even in the absence of religious agreement, at least at a general and fundamental level. Of course, we should not expect consensus. There are moral skeptics who deny that there are any moral truths. Obviously, they're not going to be part of this consensus. There are religious fideists in various traditions, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, who hold that moral truths cannot be known apart from God's special revelation, although they'll have competing theories of revelation and its sources and where it's manifested. And even among those who believe in natural law, there will be differences of opinion about its precise content and implications for certain issues. So it is, I believe, our permanent condition to discuss and debate these issues, both in the context of discussions and debates about religious faith and in the context of debates about natural law, as a matter of abstract philosophy and as a matter of practical politics. Let me conclude this Castro-length speech by just a quick note about the ways in which the natural law account of moral principles and judgment and obligations are like and unlike the major competing contenders in the moral theory boxing ring. Like utilitarian and other consequentialist approaches, and unlike Kantian ones, natural law theories are fundamentally concerned with human well-being, human flourishing, fulfillment, and indeed take as starting points basic human goods whose integral directiveness is the source of our moral norms. So following Aristotle, who's in a certain profound sense the founder of the tradition, although one also finds elements in Plato, but in any event, following Aristotle, we might say that a sound ethical theory, a natural law theory, is a eudaimonistic theory, a theory concerned with human, what used to be translated as happiness, back when happiness didn't mean just the kind of psychological state with a big smile that you might get with drugs or a machine or something like that, but rather meant fulfillment or well-being, as in happy the man who. So that, in that respect, the natural law tradition is in line with utilitarianism and unlike the Kantian approach. Unlike utilitarian approaches, however, natural law theorists understand the basic forms of human good as they figure in options for morally significant choosing, as incommensurable in ways that render senseless the utilitarian strategy of choosing the option that overall and in the long run promises to produce the net best proportion of benefit to harm, however benefit and harm may be understood. That's the import of the point I made earlier, that we predicate goodness of the various aspects or dimensions of our well-being and fulfillment as humans, not univocally, as if there were some common substance that all of the aspects of our well-being share, but just manifest differently or in different quantities, but rather we predicate goodness analogically. They are good not because they're the same with different manifestations. They really are different, but each is genuinely an aspect of our flourishing because of the variegated nature of the human nature itself and of human beings. Now, natural law theorists share with Kantians the rejection of aggregative accounts of morality that regard the achievement of sufficiently good consequences or the avoidance of sufficiently bad ones as justifying choices that would be excluded by application of moral principles in ordinary circumstances. So we embrace the principle that utilitarians reject, sometimes known as the Pauline principle that I mentioned earlier, the principle that one should never do something in itself evil, even that good consequences may come of it. Unlike Kantians, however, we do not believe that moral norms can be identified and justified apart from a consideration of the integral directiveness of the principles of practical reason directing human choice and action toward what is humanly fulfilling, what is for our flourishing, and away from what is contrary to human well-being. Natural law theorists do not, in other words, believe in purely deontological norms. Practical reasoning is reasoning about both the right and the good, and the two, the right and the good, are connected. The content of the human good, human flourishing, shapes moral norms inasmuch as such norms are entailments of the basic aspects of human well-being and fulfillment considered integrally, again, in their wholeness, in their variegated richness. One more proposition, finally, stressed by natural law theorists, and that is the fact, or what in any event we believe to be the fact, that by our choices and actions we not only alter states of affairs in the world external to us, but also and at the same time determine and constitute ourselves, for better or worse, as persons with a certain character. We make ourselves into a Mother Teresa, or a Hitler, or an Ebenezer Scrooge, or a Gandhi, or somebody in between, like most of us. Recognition of this self-shaping, self-constituting, or intransitive quality of morally significant choosing leads to a focus in this tradition on virtues as habits born of upright choosing that orient and dispose us to further upright choosing, especially in the face of strong temptation, self-interest, or prejudice, or whatever it is, to behave immorally. People sometimes ask, well, look, Professor George, is natural law about rules or virtues? We see both kinds of theories in this tradition. Some are about rules and some are virtue theories. Which is it? Where do you come down? Well, it seems to me that the answer is that it's about both. A complete theory of natural law identifies norms for distinguishing right from wrong, rules, as well as habits or traits of character whose cultivation disposes people to choose in conformity with the norms and thus compatibly with what we might call a will toward human fulfillment, a good will.